So, many of you might know that this passage is one of my favorites in the lectionary, Thomas Sunday, the week after Easter. However, I think I've often treated it like this bonus reading, this extra that we get if we are here that week after Easter. That's not what it is, though. This story is still Easter, and it's not an extra tag on or bonus content like the scene at the end of the credits in a movie. This is a story we need to hear. We need a Thomas who questions. We need this story. We need this story for the times that we ask or we hear the question, what about people who don't believe the same thing I do? Here we go. Thomas, one of the 12, isn't there for that first appearance of Jesus for whatever reason. And when he comes back, his experience is different from the rest of the disciples, and he refuses their proclamation. Now, really, he only wants what they had. So it's not an unreasonable request in this context, in this situation. The ultimate result of that, however, is his statement that he doesn't believe them, and he will not believe them, right? I will not believe. At this point, they don't know whether Jesus is going to appear in that way again. So it stands that they believe different things about the resurrection. That's pretty fundamental, pretty central. But a week later, they're still there together. Thomas hasn't left, and the others haven't kicked him out. When Jesus appeared, he breathed on them and said, "Peace be with you," and sent them out to share that. And they do, with Thomas. Not because of what Thomas believes or doesn't believe, but because of what they do. We need this story. We need a Thomas who questions, who will not believe, because we need to see how the community of faith, how the disciples respond to that, to him. We also need a Thomas who questions for ourselves, for the times that we might have questions and be afraid to be our true selves and ask them. Now, I got to this point in writing the sermon and I had to just stare at the wall for a few minutes because I wanted to go in so many directions after that. This idea of questions. Our small catechism that we use to teach confirmation is based around the question, what does this mean? I put questions into my sermons regularly, some of which I don't know if I can answer. And more than are included don't actually even make it into the sermon. Jesus' own example of love and healing and hope and service and inclusion is often at odds with the logic of the world. So our own life experience is going to involve some tension between the world God made and the society we made. More questions. How did we get to the world we live in? Why are we here? What is this all for? Wondering if we're feeling faithful enough, or how we tell if we're faithful enough. What about when we wonder? Is that okay? Yes. If any of that or more sounds like your experience at some point in time, you're actually in good company. Refer to Thomas. And if any of that or more sounds like the experience of someone you know, they're in good company too. Refer to Thomas. What do you think Jesus sees in Thomas when he comes back? How do you think Jesus looks at him? How do you think Jesus views the rest of the disciples? More questions, right? Yeah. I imagine he's very glad to see them together. We need this story. We need this example, both in the disciples' witness and response, and in Thomas's authenticity and his openness. Thomas does stay. And he's willing to change his mind. I'm impressed by that too. And because of this, he is there when Jesus appears among them a week later. And he's given as much and more, actually, as the other disciples got. Jesus shows up and calls them to do the same. And Jesus shares that peace again. Thomas receives it this time too, and is also sent out to continue sharing that peace, breaking that good news into the world. And they do. They did. We know that because we're here and we know this story. We share a piece each week during worship too. Not a piece, the piece, with each other. And we receive the peace as well. And then at the end of the worship service, we're called to go in peace, to serve the world, to share the good news. You can hear echoes of that, in this story, in this passage. But that's what we are called to do, to go in peace, serve the world, share the good news, to be our authentic selves in a complex and complicated world, to know that it's not going to be simple, but we can be true and open and grow. We are called to show up and be reminded of that, and then to go out again, to share the good news and God's peace with God's world. Thanks be to God.